Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoe Room Sessions.
Gentlemen, welcome to Invergeldy.
Thank you.
For the people who are going to watch and listen to this, I think it might be a solid start for us to explain why on earth we have any credibility to talk about land in Scotland at all. We'll come to me last with my accent, but Don, do you want to start off with who you are and what you do?
I'm not sure I have any credibility at all, but I'll tell you who I am. Don MacLeod, lawyer in Edinburgh, Track and Connell. I deal with land day in, day out, estates, farms, forestry, natural capital. My grandfather was a crofter. I was brought up in a village in the Outer Hebrides, so I understand land, I understand communities. I am actually, one thing I realised last week after the bill was passed, I myself am a large landholder. I own a house in Edinburgh with a small garden, but I'm a professional trustee for some estate clients, so I am within the definition of a large landholder, which I find confusing and perplexing. But love the industry, it's fascinating. Very proud to be associated with a number of clients who are doing great things for nature, for the environment, for employment, for farming, food production. So yeah, I find it fascinating.
And Crawford, your turn.
Okay, Dick. So Crawford Mackay, I'm a partner with Galbraith based in Edinburgh. I look after our Edinburgh-based team, specialising in everything within the rural and energy sectors. By virtue of running a team, you get involved in a variety of different things. But one of the things I've tended to focus on is the consultancy and agency side of things, particularly helping Oxygen Conservation purchase the estates within Scotland. So what credibility do I have to talk about it? Technically, Don is the expert in this field in the legal aspects of things. I suppose I'm seeing this more through the kind of practical agency lens. What will the implications be? And what devil might be in the detail that's still to follow.
Awesome. I suppose that's my turn to bring some my best efforts at credibility to the table. So over the last just over 3 years, we've built what is regarded as the largest natural capital portfolio in the UK. So 50,000 acres of land across 12 estates, 48,000 of those acres are in Scotland. So over that time, I have become a very large landowner. And that gives us a different perspective. And so much so, we were name-checked in various debates about our role in changing land dynamics. And actually, people have been really surprised how positive and welcoming we've been about the reform. I think in many ways, it's put into statute our approach to land management, to how we want to think about natural capital. And actually, it doesn't really change anything on the ground for us. But I'm still really keen to explore the realities of what that does mean, what we know, what we don't know, and how it'll change land and landscapes for people and wildlife over the next few generations. So I've got lots of questions, lots of discussion topics. So let's dive in and see where we go. Don, what problem is the Land Reform Bill trying to solve?
I think what the policymakers would say, it's too much of Scotland's land is owned by too few people. I think that would be the main objection that they're trying to solve with legislation. I don't know, Crawford, do you agree?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would agree with that. In essence, I think land reform is often described as a journey. I think we have been on a journey since the inception of the Scottish Parliament, and indeed before that. But ultimately, it's down to the concentration of ownership.
Okay, and as the bill reads as passed, will it achieve what it sought to do?
That's an easy one. Absolutely not.
Explain why. Why not?
There's so many layers to that. So, well, I think if we put the bill in context, first of all, it really does three main things, I think. So one is land management plans. Now, I think they'll be positive. So if you are a large landholder, you will have to do a statutory land management plan. And that will cover transparency of ownership, plans, community engagement. And I feel most of my clients are doing an excellent job of that at the moment. And it will just be on a more regulated formal basis.
What I'm really positive and hopeful about that is it will just be clearer what good looks like. Everything from the first day we looked at land in Scotland and people said, oh, what do local people think? I was like, who do you mean? Tell me who I'm supposed to talk to. So we just ran the data. there's 1 million people that live within 10 minutes of an oxygen conservation property. Which of those 1 million people would you like me to talk to? Because I'm not a politician. I can't go knocking on every door and saying, what's your opinion about what we're doing? People have got busy lives. They don't want to be troubled. So I think if we can give people some clarity, some definitions, and say, you absolutely must talk to these interested people, you can engage with these, and this might be nice as well. But I think people are happy to do what's asked of them if they understand what it is.
Yeah, and I think one of the main points that Scottish Land Estates have brought out in all of this stuff is what does success look like? One of the lines, I can't remember exactly what it is, but if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. And I feel so much of it is headline. You know, there was a thing in the Herald last week before by the Cabinet Secretary in the context of a lot of criticism about the bill. And her sign off was something like, this will give a signal to the lairds that change is coming. And I think that sums up where we are. It's probably virtue signalling legislation. It's quite unspecific about what success is, but it's just giving a message to everyone that big is bad. If you own lots of land, we don't care what you do with it. We just don't like the fact that you own lots of it. And I think that's the real problem, is that there's a real lack of definition around what success is in land reform. Now, if you flip on its head, what's successful in terms of land use policy, that's well defined. In terms of what's happening with nature restoration, what's happening with food production, before you get to things like employment, tourism, preservation of built heritage. Everyone knows what that looks like. But the problem is, I think, that it's become, by definition, you will be bad at that if you own too much land. You have to be small scale in order to do those things well. And I think that it's all contradictory, it's mutually exclusive, it's just...
Ecologically, it's completely flawed. You know, the law and principles are bigger, better connected. You're literally saying that's even harder than it's been before.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And, you know, one of the points I think you made is that actually it's giving people something to aim for. There's definition there. And actually, yes, 50% of Scotland's land is owned by 420 odd people, I think, like the latest count was. But actually, there's sometimes perhaps a communication and PR piece around that. I mean, you know, people don't, you know, we don't have issues with transparency, honesty, all of those things. And I think there's a lot of what's in the bill sits with oxygen conservation's values. I saw your response and Benny Higgins' response. And actually, you know, from a major landowner's point of view, some of that land management side of things, people are doing it already, and it's a communication piece as much as anything else. It's formalising what's already happening.
So, Don, you mentioned the 3 parts. That's the first part.
Second part is what's called prior notification. So this is, if you are a large landholder, there's a much more visible process in relation to selling land. The bill says, which will be an act soon, that if you take steps to sell any land, then you have to go through this process. Now, it's basically, you don't phone up Galbraith and say, I'd like you to market my house with a garden or whatever it might be. The first person you have to phone now is the government, and you tell the government, I want to sell something. Now, one of the points we made at stage 2, and many others did as well, you want to sell 0.2 acres at the edge of the village to the guy who's trying to sell his house and realises his greenhouse has been on the wrong bit of land. He wants to buy it. No problem. And that's routine in terms of my client base, and there's no issue. That will have to go through national government in terms of publicising that a large landholder is about to sell land, to try and generate interest in the community so that they know something's about to happen, designed to really make them aware that land is available and now's your time to constitute yourselves as a community body and register a right to buy. But once that bit is done, it then goes to the local government, community council. So there's just a real process around publicity. There will be exemptions that will come from that. So the government, in fairness, responded to the kind of mad position that 0.2 acres would trigger it. So they will define exempt transfers. We don't know what that will be yet.
One of the examples we were keen that wouldn't be held up was, say you had a tenant in a property that wanted to buy that property.
Yeah.
You know, I think people would, the spirit of the act would be that should be something we wanted people to be able to do. Well, if you make that harder, it's directly contradicting itself.
Yeah, we made the exact same point in one of our submissions. An estate, they want to sell the house to the the keeper who's been in there for 10 years as a tenant wants to buy. Who knows how long it'll take, but it'll be weeks, possibly months of a slowdown in relation to anything happening.
And additional costs.
Additional cost, and then just really nonsensical things that will emerge in that. So, for example, one of the things the government will have to do is keep a register of anyone who's popped up to say, let me know. But the issue with that is, round here, you'd expect it would be somebody in Comrie who might want to be told. There's no limit. So anyone around the world can register to say, let me know when something's happening, and the government have to go through this process of notifying them, which doesn't make any sense. And maybe they might realise that.
So strictly speaking, I could do a data exercise now. Well, once we're enacted, do a data exercise and say I want to be told when any large estate is being sold.
Yeah. So, and again, one of the descriptions was that the Scottish Government have turned themselves into the world's biggest estate agency.
That was a great line. Yeah.
And that is true, because they will have to accept these notifications. So if you are involved in property at all, to any degree, you'd think, why not? I will register for the whole of Scotland, so then I am not going to miss anything on Rightmove or on the market or whatever it might be. I'm being told at the point that the owner, that the law says that they cannot take any steps to sell without having gone through this process. That's why your agency colleagues, Crawford, will not be able to. They won't be able to know about it because it says you cannot take any steps. So you couldn't line up the estate agent in the background and say, right, this is going to happen. I'll go through the process.
So strictly speaking, you wouldn't be able to do a valuation to understand the value of what you could potentially sell?
I think there's all kinds of problems with the definition, and I'm sure we'll come back to those other problems. But this notion that you can't take anything, you can't take any steps to sell without going through this process, it's really, it just doesn't make any sense. But then, coming back to the point about does it actually achieve anything, I think the answer to that is rooted in community rights to buy, because all this does, it puts a trumpet blast over lands about to be sold. So the community, if they're interested, they can galvanise themselves, they've got plenty of time to register as a proper body and register their interest. The big question is, if that is so important and if that is going to solve land ownership, why is it not happening? And I forget the exact statistics, but I think on the hostile rights to buy, as they're called, so you can the rights to buy where the community can force the owner to sell, even though the owner has taken no steps to sell and doesn't want to sell. It's tiny. It's something like in 9 years there have been 2 or 3 or 3 or 4, I can't remember, instances in the whole of Scotland of these things being taken up. So to my simplistic brain, if that's what they want to do, then the law is not going to solve it. It's either a lack of money in the Scottish Land Fund, and the Scottish Land Fund have funded some excellent community buyouts. Is that what's going to solve the problem? Because why, at the end of the day, these community rights to buy, which this bill will elevate and make more significant, the reality is hardly anyone's using them. Now, some people will say it's too difficult, it's too complicated, communities are put off. That's not right. And okay, there's process because it's deprivation of property rights. There has to be some process around what the community do. You can't just fill a form out on the website and that's the end of it. But the Land Fund will fund legal fees for communities to constitute themselves and take their advice in relation to projects. It definitely is something that you can realistically do, and many communities have done it successfully. It's definitely doable, but that's the unresolved question, and that's why I don't think this process will help it. It's not happening. So
I think there's a failure to understand the realities of large-scale land ownership as well. I think people think these things are almost cash-yielding enterprises that return a lot of money year on year to their owners. I don't think they realise they cost a huge amount of money to own and manage and support. And then when you end up as a community group, because we've spoken to some of these, that they look at it and they're like, oh wow, we could not even begin to consider raising that asking price, never mind the ongoing management costs. How would we even begin to... And that's the point. So perhaps actually if more of the focus had been on creating the infrastructure to support people in actually doing it, rather than threatening every land parcel with the prospect of it, it might have actually achieved a lot more. The third part of the equation?
The third part of the equation is lotting. And I think that's the most consequential of all the the different parts of the bill. So that will work. If you are a large landholder, you want to sell more than 1,000 hectares, you will lose control over how you sell that. So there's a process. The government will ultimately tell you how your estate should be sold. And I think it's, for lots of owners and for lots of prospective buyers, that's the challenge. You come in on the way in, you know you can buy it, that's fine, but you don't know what your exit plan is going to be. That's what's causing, I think, the most uncertainty, and I don't think that there are easy answers to that. I've taken the view that the whole system around defining a large landholding it's mega complicated. It's so complicated, and it's the law of unintended consequences. It catches lots of people who really are not large landholders, including myself. But then it doesn't capture blindingly obvious situations where the group of persons definitely are large landholders, but they're not within the definition. So we've created this bureaucratic monster.
What would an example of that be?
So an example would be, so I'll give you an example that's on my desk. A family estate, and a number of years ago it was divided amongst siblings, and it's happens to be held in trust, not for any sinister reason, not for any bad reason. It's just that's how the ownership has been held. I'm a trustee on all of the trusts, and because of that, they were all linked together for the purpose of what a large landholder actually is. So you could have a situation. This is not the situation I'm talking about, but completely disconnected parties next door to each other, because there's one trustee in common, are aggregated and connected. So they may know nothing of each other. They may not know who they are.
And that wouldn't be uncommon for a professional agent to fulfill a trustee role or to have a shared function across multiple neighbouring estates?
I would say it's fairly. I can think of a few instances. Yeah,
similarly.
And as ever, you can look at that and think, well, is that likely to happen? Think, well, maybe yes, maybe not. But the wider point is that it's so unsatisfactory that you have no reliable way of checking, no means of verification. So you really are taking your chances. On the other hand, let's say there's mum, dad, and 3 children. They could take 900 hectares each, run it kind of together, but they're not connected. Or you could have husband with 999 hectares, wife with 999 hectares, not connected. You could have Mr. owning this block here, 900 hectares. You could have a trust exclusively for him owning the bit next door, not connected. So, and again, how likely are these instances to arise? They may or they may not.
Increasingly so, I'd imagine, as more and more complex legal structures come into place.
So that is the bureaucratic nightmare of trying to define what a large landholder is. But you then get the consequence of that, which is the government have to do lotting, not so that it results in immediate community ownership or even fragmented ownership. It is just that the lotting in 2026 or whenever it might be may result in future wider ownership, fragmented ownership, smaller ownership. And that's the reason I think that is so ineffective, because they could come here and say, you can't sell in Invergildy in one lot. We want this place and 10 acres to be one lot. We want the hill to be another lot. We want the shinty pitch to be another lot, or whatever it might be. So you have 10 lots. The reality is that the 10 lots could end up in private ownership. The other reality is that the community can only buy one. So if they decide they want to buy the shinty pitch, that's it. They can't buy anything else. So they've lost their chance to buy.
The community can only buy one of the lots that's...
Because they're treated like everybody else. The community could be outbid by anybody this time, and then in 5 years' time, when owner of lot 2 sells again, the community say they want to buy, then it's no longer a large landholding, but they don't have to sell to the community. It could be put back together again, so we could have Invergildy in 10 lots, sold in 10 lots, somebody buys the heart of the estate, and over the next 10 years, the different lots come back on the market. they're just bought back in.
But in the initial transaction, an individual party would only be allowed to buy one of the lots.
Yes, which includes the community. My solution, which
Who on earth has argued for that as a solution? Like, who does that benefit?
yeah, I mean that's the problem. But this is the thing that, and sometimes I think this is so easy, I must be missing something. But hear me out. At the moment, community right to buy, the community can say to you, right, we want this bit down here. We're not interested in the whole of Invergildy. We will register a right to buy in the 20 acres down by the village or whatever it might be. So they register their community right to buy, which means that if you take steps to sell, you have to say to them first, do you want to buy it? And if they say yes, the district valuer says, there's the market value, boom, off you go. They could then say, actually, we think we want to do a sustainable development right to buy of the 5 acres closer to the village or whatever it might be. And they can then force you to sell that, subject to test. It's not an absolute. But if they want to do it for some sustainable purpose, they can force you to sell. They could do 100 acres. They could do 200 acres. If it's in a crofting community, it's exactly the same. So my simplistic take on it is the reason lotting is completely unnecessary is because communities can do their own lotting at the moment by defining their rights to buy. And to my mind,
This is actually taking something away from the community,
Exactly.
not giving something.
exactly. So if you have a motivated community who want to do something around this, and that's what it always takes, a group of people who are committed, who are passionate, and who will organise this. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. If it's on their minds that they want to do something, they have so many tools in the toolbox right now to do their own lotting that doesn't require the government. It doesn't require this whole mangled system of definition of large landholder, uncertainties around how you can sell land in the future. But then ultimately, because it has to be human rights compliant, there has to be compensation if it all goes wrong. So the bill says that it's complicated, and I am very high level summary, but if lotting doesn't go to plan and the landowner's out of pocket, the government have to pay compensation. So that apply here, 10 lots, 5 are sold, you cannot sell the other 5 because they're totally unattractive. And there's no buyer for whatever the government in their wisdom think you should be selling as a lot. That's where you'd be looking to the government to give you compensation.
What was the total bill given to the community right to buy groups last year? Is it £10 million or something?
I thought it was a bit more than that, but yeah.
But still, that's going to be used very quickly on compensation, isn't it?
Yeah. If this,
One
if
big
this doesn't-
50,000 acre estate, you could wipe that out. You could wipe out the entire pot on compensation. The other thing is the reality of delivering that. So civil servants, with all best will in the world, are trying their best to do a job, most of them. The people who fulfil these roles in terms of lotting within the newly created government organisations are not going to be you two. They're not going to be people with decades of experience doing this, because the government cannot pay a market rate for an expert. Ergo, the lotting decision is going to be made with somebody, perhaps in London, perhaps someone who hasn't got the level of experience, knowledge on the land to make an informed decision anyway, which is another massive risk, I think.
That's exactly what I was going to come in on there, because selling an estate is not easy. Despite what people may think, it is not easy. And the amount of work that goes into it to make sure that all of those cross rights, other issues that we come across, legal due diligence that has to happen beforehand, it is significant. It's not just as simple as pulling together a set of sales particulars and posting them out, right, there we go, let's get someone on the hook and sell it. The amount of work that goes in to make sure that it's packaged correctly is significant.
Our proposal documents when we buy an estate are 100 pages of DD work with experts, lawyers, accountants, land agents, advisors on it. That's not a cheap or easy process to do at all.
No, and what I'm intrigued to know is, as you say, the resourcing of it, where the specialist is going to come from, how's that going to be paid for? And similarly, for someone acting for a seller, what engagement are we going to be allowed to have with them to try and have a steer on how that can be lotted? I suspect nil.
Other than your very good self, one of my favourite people working in the space is Ev Channing. And she's described how she's gone almost a decade from first engagement with a family to talking to them about the future of their estate and how it might be sold and developed. And I think there's a view that people are selling large estates like they are mid-terraced. It's not the same thing at all. You might have hundreds of tenants and licenses and commitments, moral, ethical, emotional, to people who live and work in these places. You need to talk to those people. Now, how does it integrate the fact that, you know, you need to lot this? Are you allowed to tell your tenants you're going to do it? Are you allowed to talk to your grazers, your crofters and people like that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what that's the mood music that underlies rather all of this. There's in some quarters there's a view that big ownership is just money motivated, it's short term, it's in out, and I can't understand where that comes from. So if I think about my client base of estate owners from Shetland down to the borders, no one enters into this lightly. Many of them genuinely, passionately see their role as the custodian. They don't want to be the one that messes it up, so there's nothing to pass on to the next. And if there's a decision to sell, it's many, many years rather than, oh, we're bored with this place and now we're going to sell it, and the community have no route in. They do. And actually, and I think your point is absolutely right, Rich. This bill in relation to lotting will actually, I would suggest, take something away from the community, because at the moment they're the masters of their own destiny in terms of registering the various rights to buy that they now have, whereas they can still do that, but in addition to that we'll have a civil servant in Edinburgh looking to do a lot, do a lotting.
So actually you can't have that bit, you can have this bit instead.
Yeah. And also, bad news community, if we lot it, you're only getting one piece. And if you blow your shot buying the 2 acres by the village to get X number of houses on it, then that's it. You can't have any more.
So the phrase you used was junk law.
You don't hear many solicitors coming out with a phrase like that.
I did.
Must have moved you sufficiently to put those words to paper.
Yeah, it did, and it was carefully done, or consciously done, and yeah, I guess in the word toolbox of an Edinburgh lawyer, if something's bad, we used to say it's problematic. If something's a complete disaster, it's highly problematic. So to go from that to junk is quite a leap. I think the reason I did it was, or used that word, was we respond to consultations all the time. And we have a voice, and is limited, and it has its constraints. But we are a voice. We have something to say, and you have something to say, Crawford, as a land agent, and you as an owner. Everyone has something to say. But we comment to the effect that this doesn't work, or that's a problem, using polite terminology. And the concern is that it doesn't seem to make any difference. So we get bill after bill, we get regulation after regulation, and it's not good. So yeah, it was a fairly spicy, punchy title, which and it did get a lot of attention. But then the slightly depressing thing is that it didn't really get enough attention. And what was really interesting was when my article went out, Andy Whiteman, who's a long-standing land reform campaigner.
He was hoping to join us today as well, but diaries couldn't work, as was Sarah from Scottish Land and Estates.
And you know, Andy's immersed in the sector, and has such interesting and carefully expressed views. Andy has read my article, and we were in touch, and we did a letter to the Cabinet Secretary to say, this is not about the policy. We're not commenting positively or negatively. It's the implementation of this is really, really bad. So can you pause it? And it wasn't a dramatic request to bin it or to start again. It was just pause. This is really complicated stuff. Send it back to the committee so that it can be scrutinised. And this is a function of the stage 3 process with the Scottish Parliament. So stage 1, stage 2, very detailed driven evidence sessions, experts come along. Stage 3, it's basically open season. So the objection in relation to the definition of large landholders, which is a real mess, that pops in at stage 3, no committee scrutiny, no expert scrutiny, and the debate in the Scottish Parliament, I think it's probably minutes rather than anything else. It's really, really superficial. But yeah, here we are. The definition slipped through, and off we go.
So you're in touch with every investor, landowner, different type of player in the sector, Crawford. How has it landed? What has been the mood music?
So I would say there's some similarities across all of the camps. If you're an existing landowner who wants to continue with the management of your estate, you view this as being bureaucratic, a bit unnecessary, and a lot of the rights are there already, actually. On the flip side of that, a lot of people kind of like, well, actually, you know what, I'm doing this already. You know, what kind of difference does it make? I just need to basically formalise that on paper and show that I'm doing it every 5 years. But I think we've still got to see what the detail of the content is going to be. That's what the issue is. A lot of this is still, there's known unknowns. That's what's causing uncertainty. And I think a knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people could make is that, oh well, Scottish land values are going to crash. There's all this extra work, extra bureaucracy, difficulties. I think my note to that would be, let's wait and see what happens in time. There's a lot of secondary legislation that's going to be required to address the issues with the primary. So from an investor's point of view coming into the sector, if I put that actually sitting investors to one side, personal individuals, they are still looking at estates in Scotland. It's still a very attractive place to buy, stable with part of the rest of the UK. And some of these, some of the aspects of the bill are familiar, whether they're based in the UK or live overseas. They're quite common within the rest of Central Europe, for instance. From the investor's point of view, I think we've still seen people want to aggregate funds despite all of this going on for a long period of time. And as a sector, we've always been pretty resilient. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, land reform has been a journey. We've implemented some fantastic things up here. The right to roam, I think, is top of the tree in that respect.
Which is barely taken advantage of in terms of something that's hard fought and should be protected. And actually, I think in England, something more akin to that should occur. But it's barely used. And I think it comes with one of those additional tools that just isn't taken advantage of enough.
Yeah. So from my point of view, I think from an investor, someone with similar objectives to yourselves, you are most effective at scale. Someone like OC, someone like Anders Poulsen, there's investment in the country, money's being spent. Anders has gone from spending his money not just in the rural environment in terms of investing in buildings, bringing them back into use, holiday accommodation and the like, retraining of staff. He's now brought that into the urban environment as well in terms of purchasing a heritage asset, Jenner's department store in Princess Street, and he's investing heavily in that. So this is someone who's passionate about Scotland. And I really hope we strike the balance that we can provide for community ownership, address some of the key points behind the bill, but also make it an attractive place to continue investment in Scotland.
I think we could all agree that's important. Don, we spoke a little bit before we started recording about those echoes that we're seeing from Europe. Can you talk a little to that, where similar things do exist and what is that European playing field?
The Scottish Land Commission actually, from memory, have an excellent paper on this where they look at it's further than Europe, similar rules in terms of how you sell land, and it's worth a read. It's on their website. And as Crawford was saying, I sometimes am surprised in the last couple of years, you speak to a client who wants to buy a chunk of land or a chunk of forestry or an estate or whatever, and you feel obliged to talk through land reform, thinking that it's going to be a short phone call and you'll never see them again. But the surprising thing is, there's a large extent to which they shrug their shoulders. Oh, well, it's not perfect, but I love Scotland. I love Scottish landscapes. I would really want to buy and invest in a Scottish estate, so I'm not bothered. I find that curious because if it was me, I think, right, I buy it, but how do I sell it? Don't know. Not sure about that. I find American clients the same, because there are similar rules in Germany, for example. I think there is, in some parts of Germany, a pretty low level in terms of what you can sell without local government approval. I think there's French government intervention powers. If the farmland market is getting a bit frothy, they can intervene to try and keep farmland prices within reach of farmers. So no one's denying that these things exist elsewhere, for sure, and they may be quite good. But I think that the problem here is that I think we totally overlook the tools that already exist in order to protect communities, to empower communities, and to ultimately give the community a voice and actually results in terms of ownership. And what's in my mind is land use. That's heavily regulated. You need planning permission, you need SEPA consents, permits, you need Nature Scot, whatever. So that's all there. You've got property right interests that protect your neighbours. You have then the rights to buy, the community right to buy, the crofting right to buy, the abandoned and neglected land right to buy, the sustainable development right to buy, the agricultural tenants right to buy, the individual crofter's right to buy, and I think there's one more I've forgotten. That's a lot. And if that gives communities power, that if they really are interested in ownership, go for it.
It's almost as if the right to buy isn't the problem, and it's the fact they can't organise or raise the capital to do so. And nothing in this bill is going to solve either of those two aspects.
I think that's kind of nail in the head in the sense that, like it or not, and I know there's plenty of voices who wouldn't like this, but land has a value. And if there's a policy that land reform means fragmented ownership and rights are taken away, there's an inescapable reality that there has to be compensation. And I guess a question for any policymaker would be, is this value for money? And it may or it may not be. But I think the fact that there's so little funding of community purchases, it's quite notable. And I think maybe possibly being very controversial, but I can't reconcile the irony that the policy is big as bad. One of the biggest landowners in the country is the Scottish Government. So question mark that. And not only are they kind of legacy, we own lots of forest properties and we own some estates in Scotland, they're active buyers. And they are active buyers on the private market, with a well-known example that has been in the papers again recently.
What was the one that got sold to Scottish Forestry that looked like a footballer's estate?
Oh, it was Glenprosen in Angus.
That's
it's the
right.
off-market one that's commonly referred to. Yeah.
And there's an excellent piece by Magnus later in the Times about that, just charting the process of getting there. A big price on the private market, and then in terms of land use decisions since then, really testing, is this good? And I'm not commenting on that, I'm just pointing out that there's a real irony that big is bad if it's private, but it's otherwise maybe okay, and there's participation in a style of trading land where the stated policy aims to discourage that.
I think one point that concerns me is that we've arrived at this 1,000 hectares arbitrary figure, and at that level, actually, it will already catch a lot of hill sheep units on the west coast and in the Highlands, which is pretty marginal stuff. Adds additional expense, bureaucracy. Personally, that's not what the bill set out to target either. That's bringing a lot of those people into that 1,000 hectare threshold, which, as I say, was a bit of an arbitrary figure. And there are those out there who would like to see that figure come down even lower.
Even lower, yeah.
So that brings more and more people into the catchment. And, it's tough work, farming in those areas, being custodians of estates of that nature. It's not always a cash-rich environment. And actually, you then have to look at, this is another thing we've spoken about a bit, but the lotting requirements, you referred to the delay and the time that comes with that. As a registered valuer, if I'm going to value any piece of land, say for a bank, and they say to us, okay, can you please provide us with market value, and then market value to subject to a 6-month marketing period, restricted 6-month marketing period. What figure am I meant to put now? Because actually, I don't know. Because are you going to be able to sell it in 6 months? Are you going to be able to sell it in 12 months if you've got to go to the Scottish Government first? What's that system going to look like? So it's not just going to catch people at the point of sale. It indirectly affects their ownership, ability to borrow, finance, etc. already.
When we had the inheritance tax changes in the UK, James Farrell at Knight Frank shared with me, they had ironically had a mass push of people suddenly deciding, oh, I had no idea I could benefit from the new inheritance tax rate. I'll move money into land, thank you. So might we actually see a counterintuitive rush in the next 2 years, say, where if someone was sat there, a group or an individual going, do you know what, I do want that Scottish estate, I need to go now or I'm not going to get the one I want? Do you think we might actually see a rush to get land under ownership?
I think that the timing challenge is that because this is so complicated, it could be, I've heard 2030 or 2032 before this is brought into force. So there's a long road left before this is actually effective as law. But yeah, you're right. If you're speaking to clients who want to sell, the message would be go now. And if you're speaking to clients who want to buy, it would be if you want to buy, go for it before it's more difficult. The one thing I would say, hopefully not contradicting myself, but
some of the best things are contradictions and compromises.
There is a certain sense that I think the ministers will have to be extremely careful with how they impose lotting, because there are expectations in relation to how that's done. So, I mean, I probably use silly examples. So, would Invergeld ever be lotted as 10 lots? That's probably silly. But because the government have to, in making their decision, they have to consider, and to an extent justify, but how will this result in more fragmented ownership, or I can't remember the exact word in the bill, but that's effectively the policy. So there are constraints on them, and I wouldn't be surprised if they are actually pretty cautious in how the lotting boundaries are drawn up in the future, because it's opening the public purse to quite a liability. If it all goes wrong and properties can't be sold, then there may well be a big problem that costs a lot.
So there was the significant estate sold by Guy Hands recently, circa 140 million, big forestry estate with wind on it and things. Imagine the lotting of that. So you've got a large commercial forestry enterprise on there, you've got a wind farm on there, you've got multiple revenue streams. You draw a fence line or a lotting line in the wrong place on that, that's a £10 million change.
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes back to the point that if this is about fragmenting ownership, then the minister in question will have a pretty difficult job, because they'll have to sit down and think, right, how do I take a decision and justify that drawing the line there means that not right now, but in the future, there's a greater chance of more fragmented ownership.
Yeah, and then similarly, so that sale that you just referenced, that was across Scotland, England, Wales. It was a portfolio of assets, and therefore, where does the lotting start and end within Scotland? Is it going to be on each single part, and then actually what elements are going to be left to sell to one investor?
Yeah.
Forests, reservoirs, renewable energy locations, it's going to be really complicated. We're sat in the dining room at Invergeld recording this. Behind Don's head is a map of habitat restoration, and it shows all the different habitat types across the estate, and it's the perfect framing for how complicated this is. You know, you're going to cut through a peat bog, are you going to go through a woodland? What about a river? How are all these things going to work? The thing we don't have at the moment, in a world whereby we've got a climate that's crumbling around us and biodiversity mass collapse, and no one in any of the discussions around this bill doubted either of those 2 points. That was universally accepted. The one thing we don't have is time. So how concerned are you both about slowing the process of land transition and the impacts it'll have on climate and biodiversity?
So the example that I often reference is when I was fortunate enough to stay at Glenfeshie one of Anders Poulsen's estates, and he was, to be quite honest, a bit of a pioneer. He wanted to go out and buy estates, change land management practices, and quite frankly, get on with it. There are some photographs there. I think one of them's an old Polaroid in one of the cottages, which shows what the estate was like when he bought it. And it's right next to the window, looking out over part of the estate, and it's from the same spot, basically. And it shows, a relatively barren, heavily grazed landscape. But you look out the window now, the juniper is 12 feet. But he's been able to do that because it was something that he wanted to achieve. He wanted to get on with it and could affect change at scale and quite quickly. You guys are doing the same thing. If we then start to slow that process, I think it will inevitably have an effect.
One thing I think they've done wonderfully at Wildlands is employment and homes for people, two things. So across auction conservation, this isn't specific to Scotland, but we've created somewhere around 60 jobs and have about 65 people living in properties that we own and manage, and more than 1,000 visitors ecotourism-wise a year. How does more fragmented ownership help create jobs and homes for people? That's a circle I couldn't square.
Yeah, me neither.
I was hoping you were going to say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll thought process in my mind. Yesterday, I was with estate clients who will have a large land holding, and they are not from the UK. But what they are doing is just outstandingly good. So they are investing in the properties. They are investing in the accessible holiday accommodation. They are renovating the long lets for the people that stay in them. They're doing everything. And you look at that and think, okay, nature, tick. Housing, tick. They've added to the payroll employment, tick. The house is in better condition, tick. They're using local trades, tick. Local professional consultants. And when I was driving home last night, and anticipating what we might discuss today, it struck me, what is wrong with that? Why is the mood music from some policymakers in some quarters, you're bad, you're not UK, and that's kind of floated around sometimes, banning foreign owners. You own a good chunk, so we'd want calls to voices to limit that, and we don't want you to have it all together, we want it all to be fragmented. Now the flip side is that there must be, and there are bad examples of large-scale land ownership, and there are bad examples of large-scale community ownership. That's in the press in the BBC yesterday, according to one report, at least. But it comes back to this by definition, big has to be bad. Whereas I just wish we could get to a stage where we can see that big can be good, and we don't need to bash landowners over the head with signals that we're coming for you when you're doing all these great things in the housing emergency, in the climate emergency. I think that's the thing that perplexes me.
Yeah, and if you look at a lot of, we're kind of talking about nature, but if we talk about energy as well, a lot of proposals for onshore wind, solar, etc., they happen at scale. And, it's not uncommon to need to try and get a lot of landowners to collaborate to make things happen. That is so much more difficult than just having one landowner where we can have a relationship with the developer, figure out where A, it's an appropriate place for a development such as that to happen, but B, to quite frankly get on and go through a process with it. If you've got to bring all of those parties together, it can quite often just take one fairly central one who doesn't want to do it, and the whole renewable energy proposal is knocked on the head.
In the absence of that scale, do we almost risk deprofessionalising land management and the industries around it? Because, for example, a series of aggregated owners won't have the financial ability to have professional advice in each of those aspects potentially. There aren't enough experts in land management, in certainly the changing state of land management, but are there going to be enough clients with the critical mass to provide them with the jobs? We've seen, there's an amazing movie the year before last about the last keeper. We've seen gamekeepers almost passing away. We've essentially had to redefine, we don't bring estate managers from a traditional estate management background. We pull them from all other aspects of hospitality, and we've got 2 PhD academics who've come to be estate managers because the jobs aren't there for them in a traditional sense anymore.
I think that's absolutely right, because actually, as a sector, I mean, I've been kind of involved and had an interest from as soon as I was born. This is a sector that I wanted to get into. I inherently knew it. There was a point in time that people just didn't understand what it is, what I do as a job, whereas actually people are taking so much more of an interest in the sector now than they did 10, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, 15, 20 years ago, would you imagine you'd be sitting around a table in one of the estates that you own on a podcast talking about land reform?
Not quite, no.
So we have got excellent, talented people coming into the sector. I think that's only a good thing. It's a great thing. So in many ways, I'm quite reassured that the talent's out there. It's got an interest and a genuine interest. We just need to not stifle people coming in now by making it.
The change I'm about to describe is not specific to Scotland. In fact, more so, it might be an English-based difference. But I chaired a panel for a Pensions for Purpose investment conference last week. And what I was able to say is, I think the impact of institutional scale investors into the environmental sector has actually made it far more collaborative, because prior to significant capital coming, it was very localist to the point of, well, that river restoration scheme isn't right because we did it from this bank as opposed to that bank, and your version isn't the right one, ours is. So I think actually we've gained so much in collaboration from the investors coming into a new way of working. I worry it's going to be a step away from that. It's actually going to make it less collaborative. It's going to make it more, as well as disaggregated ownership, it's going to be disaggregated standards and processes and ways of working. We're going to end up really inconsistent with how we look at things.
Somebody else made this point recently, and I was struck by it as I was driving through Glencoe yesterday. And it's wide open landscape, very Scottish, almost characteristically just as an icon of Scotland when you get to the top of the glen and look down. Fragmented ownership, the effect on just the landscape with more boundary features here.
Does it literally mean more fences? Like, if you buy your 10 acres, are you going to fence off your 10 acres?
You think most people, the first thing they do if there's an undefined boundary in what they own is they define it. Yeah. And you think, well, wow, what would North West Sutherland look like? What would Glencoe look like?
It can't be good for people and wildlife.
Yeah. You wouldn't have thought so, no.
At all. Okay, let's move on to, let's find some positives. Where are the opportunities that the bill gives us, or even where are the opportunities we have now to the 2030s until we start seeing it become real?
From my point of view, I think the land management plans, there's a lot of that work is already happening, and I think it's about communicating that. I mean, there's still lots of devil in the detail in terms of what content's going to be required, timescale for renewal, that kind of stuff. But I'm not afraid of that, really. Yeah. I think that could be an opportunity just to really continue the work that the likes of SLE are doing to demonstrate what is already happening in the sector.
Yeah, and I think I started as a trainee solicitor in 2006, which was a couple of years after the Land Reform Scotland Act 2003 came into force. It came into force in 2004. And I remember starting as a trainee, and it was very negative about community rights to buy, and were there ways that things could be structured to avoid the rights to buy, because the rights to buy were really impactful, and there was concern about the right to roam, and there was in the early days a few cases that ended up in the courts, and you almost I look back at that now and think, the 2003 Act, so what? I don't even think that. Because that suggests it's negative. It's not. It's a thing. It's fine. You want to walk up a hill? Fine. And all the problems have settled down in relation to access. The community rights to buy, they're there. Fair enough. The community want to register an interest to buy it. They do that. It's triggered. Do you want to buy it? Yes or no? Do you have the money? Yes or no? And if you don't want to buy it, you move on. Do you have the money? Well, unfortunately, you can't buy it. So you look back and think, well, all the panic, and now 20 odd years later, we're fine. So then I think 2016 Act, 2025 Act, will we look back in 10 years' time and think, shrug the shoulders, it's fine, we've adapted, it's not as bad as we were saying in 2024, 2025. And I think there's a certain sense that could be true, in the sense that we'll get over it, and we'll learn how to deal with it, and there will still be people in the sector who, despite the mood music and despite the criticism in some quarters about scale ownership, these guys will carry on because it's still doable, it's still achievable. Community rights to buy are elevated. Well, that's fine. The community can have their say, they can have their go at buying. That's fair enough, and that's all regulated. I don't want to give you a negative when you ask for a positive, but I think lotting is the one thing that's just I'm not quite sure about that. So I think to answer the question, I agree land management plan's positive. I'm not sure it's positive to say we'll look forward in 10 years' time and shrug our shoulders and think, what was all the fuss about? But then, this is another negative, it's the journey. It's the fact that it keeps on coming. And as the Minister said a couple of weeks ago, this is sending a signal to the lairds, which is that if this one doesn't work, we're going to come back with another one to try and get you. Who knows when the next land reform bill will be.
Also in itself just a bit of an archaic saying as well, or it's a message to the lairds.
I think it's quite provocative.
Yeah.
So I think that's the. Right, how do I turn that into a positive?
But we need to work hard on that.
So from an OC perspective, we have a positive. Essentially, it feels like our approach to land management, and actually we plan on reaching out and saying, this is what we do in terms of a land management plan. And we've had some wonderful feedback from Scottish Forestry and the government about how we engage with local communities. We're going to say, this is how we work. What do you like? Does this give you a framework to start with? If it helps you get some of the way there, fantastic. If it's not useful, no problem at all. But everyone's been really kind about what we do, so we thought, well, that's what we can do to try and help in this gap in terms of a period. And in some ways, it kind of feels like they've declared that we've won natural capital. Because if you were going to start tomorrow and try and put together a portfolio equivalent size, same as Anders, equivalent size, scale, reach, it got harder, or it certainly will get harder in future. So in terms of finding a positive, there is quite a self-serving one for us. So we've managed to put together, with your help, thank you, a large 50,000 acre portfolio across the UK, 48,000 acres of that in Scotland. And actually doing that now is going to be much harder. Now, whilst that's good for us as a business because we have a unique set of assets, what's really disappointing is my goal for OC was always, I wanted what we'd done not to matter. I wanted it to be a shrug of shoulders because I wanted 10, 20, 30 businesses to come along and build equivalent portfolios that were able to aggregate land at scale, because I think it is with that scale. So our mantra is scaling conservation, and with scale, you can create opportunities and jobs and draw in investment, and you can, we're doing it here at the minute, renovate cottages, offer new opportunities, create new employment. And that's just harder if you can't work at scale, and that's a shame. We've touched on this a number of times, but land reform has always been an emotional as well as an economic topic. What's one of the biggest misunderstandings you think the public have in terms of land and land management in Scotland?
I can give you a real life example. So I took some pals hind stocking in February, and they are not from Edinburgh, but wouldn't have much experience of estates. And they know what my work is and what I do. But what was so interesting after the trip was they came away thinking, well, that was great fun. I really enjoyed it. But it was kind of penny, right, so I was talking to the stocker and he was talking about this and he was talking about that and he was talking about this. Oh, it's quite hard. It's so interesting what they're doing, and they're reducing deer numbers for this and they're da-da-da-da-da. And it was almost like that kind of penny dropping. Oh yeah, I thought Don just acted for posh toffs who owned lots of land. I'm using their pejorative language rather than the language that I would ever use. But they saw it and they kind of experienced it, and they thought, actually, that is quite different from what I thought it was going to be. And then the emotion comes in. I mean, the emotion comes in when you hear, am I right in saying government ministers? Yeah, I think it was government ministers talking about the clearances in the context of land reform. And I think that's a challenge. The clearances were in the 1800s, and the clearances were inexcusable and awful and terrible. But you think, wow, it's 2025, and we're talking about something that we're identifying as a land use law, ownership law, being informed by something that happened in the 1800s, and which was solved by the introduction of crofting. And a crofter is probably, in my view, the most protected tenant in the whole world, not just Scotland or the UK. Crofting is absolutely enshrined. the tenancy is protected, it's passed on, the rent is very small. That was the answer. And you think, wow, in 2025 we're talking about natural capital, climate emergency, all the rest of it, but we're allowed to, or we are having, it seems, things that happen, criminal things that happened in the 1800s inform what we do now, and you think, that can't be right. But that's the emotion of it, which I understand, in the sense that, as I mentioned at the beginning, my grandfather was a crofter, and crofting is hard, and it's designed to be subsistence living, and it's not supposed to be, wasn't ever supposed to be sustainable and supportable in its own right. It was always to top up your job, and in my case, my grandfather was a bus driver in addition to being a crofter. That's the way it was supposed to work, and now it's the whole even that has become so kind of strange and so kind of blown up and emotional that it's the lairds against the crofters in some quarters. But then again, I think actually in how many quarters? And then it comes back to, I think it's actually a very small but very vocal minority of people who actually think that.
Our brilliant chairman, Benny Higgins, has that exact same conversation. I think he wrote it in a piece for the Times. He said if he walked down the street in Edinburgh and spoke to every business leader he knew, land reform wouldn't have been on their top 10 issues at play. We've experienced it a lot, whereby we've had groups of people, 90% of a local community saying, we really like this approach to things, but a very small group says, no, we just want something completely different. But the volume is the bit that's recognised, not the range of sentiment, not the prevailing view. What about you, Crawford?
I'd say there can be, misunderstanding can come in a lot of different forms. I think the thing that struck me most, just in conversations that I've had, it is people within an urban environment not quite understanding what the composition of rural Scotland is, and particularly the figure that keeps on being mentioned of 50% of Scotland's land being owned by a little over 400 people. We've got to remember what type of land that is, and actually, would a community want it a lot of the time as well? What can you do with it? And an understanding of land management practice, your conversation about your friends when you took them out on the hill. Dare I say it, there's lots of people, we could go and walk over parts of an estate and you could walk past a dry peat hag that's emitting carbon, and actually they didn't realise that's a land management practice issue, that's the kind of thing that could be addressed. So actually, as much as there's a drive for change, I think also some education understanding of what land management involves and the rural sector.
When we set off to buy land, we visited more than 100 estates to buy 12, and recognised really early we need to work with the best experts, because we knew and still know a fraction of what there is to know. And I think for all of us, that's probably the biggest misconception, that we've all got tons more we can learn. And those who haven't spent years and years with their feet on the ground can never hope to understand a fraction of the complexities and the beauty and the magic and the majesty of lands like we have here. We have a tradition in the podcast that my final question is, what is the one question I haven't asked you wish I had?
So we've spoken about lots about concerns, etc. I guess a statement as much as a response. I hope that there's not going to be a huge vacuum between now and then of secondary legislation and or everything that sits behind the bill, because actually that breeds more uncertainty, and I think that's worse for Scotland more than anything else. So I think, I wish the question that you asked me was, what's the biggest concern in the short term? And I think it's stagnation. That would be the worst thing. I think, if we've got a direction set that's, it has to be practical, it has to be implementable, but we need that framework in place so that we don't have any stagnation. That would be the worst thing from my point of view.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
I'm still lost for words. I can't think of anything I wanted to say that you haven't already covered in your excellent questioning.
Yeah.
Mine will be an offer as well then. So I think I'm, what's the word? Pathologically positive or optimistic. I think I just try and find the opportunity in every situation we get. So I'm going to end with an offer rather than a question. We're here to help. and I know these guys feel the same, we want a thriving, vibrant, energetic, nature positive Scotland. And we've got expertise and land and the ability to trial things and demonstrate things and share things. Whatever we have, it's yours. If you're out there and you want to be part of this solution, get in touch. We'd love to help. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the time. I've adored that education from both of you. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.